Good day. Welcome to Conversations, a series brought to you by the Methodist Church, the BVI Circuit. Today we begin a new series of discussions focused on Methodism in the history of the British Virgin Islands and how it impacted the development of this territory. As you might be aware, this month, May, is celebrated as Methodist Heritage Month across the MCCA, that is the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas. For the next 2 months, May and June, we will attempt to get an understanding of how the Methodist Church, as one of the oldest Christian faith communities in the territory, has been empowering the people through its witness, teaching, and shepherding. I am Angel Smith, your host. And with me today is Dr. Charles Wheatley, one of our senior local preachers and a retired educator whose career extended to all levels of the territory's education system. Dr. Wheatley, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to share with us today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Today, our focus is on Methodism in the Virgin Islands, and we want to discuss and have an overview of the role of the church in the community to get an understanding of some of the background and the history of Methodism in the Virgin Islands. And I think, Dr. Wheatley, that you are in a position to help us to get this kind of understanding. Sometimes we take things for granted. The Methodist Church has been around and we are Methodist, and we forget that there is actually a beginning. I had a discussion some time ago with a young man who said to me that he was doing some research, and it seems to him like the Methodist Church is a new organization that came into the Virgin Islands because all he was seeing was the Church of England. And he said, and Wesleyans, but he said he didn't see where Methodism came in. And I tried to point out to him that what he saw being referred to as the Wesleyans, that was in fact the Methodists and the names. So I don't know if you can give us an idea as to when Methodism actually came to the British Virgin Islands and some background information.
As far as record shows, Methodism first came to the British Virgin Islands in 1789, when Dr. Coke and Reverend William Hammett visited the island, the road Tartola. And on that visit, they found the territory fertile for mission, because the Anglican Church, which was here before them, was really catering for the planters and their staff and not the Negroes. So the Negroes did not really have any religious influence from any of the Christian churches.
So it would seem then that we are talking about a period of time when the plantation system was in place in the 1700s, and slavery was a part of the economic system that existed in the Virgin Islands. And that would seem like a period of time when the Methodism came in. But in fact, you said that they visited the Virgin Islands. So it didn't seem like there was a focused attempt at coming in to plant a ministry or some work?
Well, they did set up missions from that visit.
Okay.
Started setting up missions from that visit. I think they left Hammett here for a while, and then it grew from there. So that was sort of the beginning of Methodism in the British Virgin Islands, and it spread across Anegada, Virgin Gorda, Tortola, and Yost Van Dyke. and the Peter Island.
Okay.
Those were the main centers over the 19th century period, where Methodism grew. You would have found that there were either worship houses or churches, as they would, whatever they would call them, there in those places at the time. East End is one of the earlier churches. This particular building is one of the later forms of that early 1810 building, which was built at that time. And then you had an expansion and so forth. In Rotown, you had the church and the church hall, which it was really the school. We will come to that in another forum.
Right.
But they had two buildings there with the church school and the building. Methodist was really more than religious service to the community. Mm-hmm. They were educating the people. They were educators. And we will come to that in greater detail, but you can't separate them too much, you know. But as we said, the Negroes got their first exposure to Christianity through the Methodist Church.
So it would seem, as from what you're saying, and we could say that when Hammett came in and Methodism took root in the Virgin Islands, where the Methodist missionaries were working among the enslaved people, because at that time you noted that the Church of England would have had some presence, but then their presence was not so much catering to the spiritual needs of the enslaved people. They were mainly spiritually supporting the planter class at the time. So would it be safe then to say that the Methodist Church, the Methodist organization or the Methodist Church could have been seen as the church of the enslaved people in these islands?
Indeed, that's what it was.
Okay.
It was the church for the enslaved people because that's where they worshipped. And I think the church, the missionaries who came directly with that in mind to reach out to the slaves. Again, they have different names for whatever they were doing. Some call it Christianizing them, some, different. But the educating and whatever it was, they reached out to them and sort of tried to bring them into the Christian faith.
So with that foundation, then, we see moving forward that the church, the Methodist Church, then became an all-embracing organization, spreading across the Virgin Islands. As you've noted, churches were eventually built in communities in Virgin Gorda, in Anegada, in Josephine Dyke, and Peter Island, the main island communities, the main centers. But here in Tortola, you noted that we had the church here, where we had now at East End Methodist Church. This was one of the churches that was the early churches in the Virgin Islands. We had Rotown Methodist, and also we had
West End.
The West End Church.
And they were the main ones.
The main churches here
in Garden Bay.
Yeah. So the main churches on Tortola
they were
initially.
The four main churches.
Okay.
King
and
Garden
then
Bay,
eventually the mission field spread to other communities.
Yes, because you see, the churches were so far apart that some of the members who, as they get older, they could not walk to the church. And some of the younger members weren't able to walk, so they set up what they call prayer houses. And that's where Sikaubi started as a prayer house to cater for those who were there, so who could not come to Rotown at a certain time. Long Look started to cater for those who could not come to East End. Bellevue started to cater for those who could not go to Rotown and so forth. So that was the way today they are independent churches, but they were not in those
Okay.
days.
So we had the main churches, the three main churches
Four.
on Tortola.
The four main
But
churches.
King Garden Bay then became a church on its own too. So you had those main churches. And in addition to that, you had in communities, you had the prayer houses.
Prayer houses.
So you went to church at the central church in your community. For example, here, everybody would come to East End on Chapel Hill on a Sunday. But then during the week, they have their prayer meetings in Long Look.
In Long Look.
But
in those days, they had two services on the Sunday. And for instance, in this area here, the evening service would be kept at Long Look.
Okay, all right.
So they would only come for the morning services.
Lovely. All right. So, but how about the churches? How the church function? We had at that time initially the missionaries, and then we have ministers. And we were talking about the 1900s. You had ministers, but we didn't have. We're talking about four main churches on Tortola, at least two churches in Virgin Gorda, one in Anegada, one in Jasper Neck, and even when there was a church in Peter Island. So how did the church, how were they able to maintain these churches in terms of preaching on a Sunday?
Well, you have to realize that in those days there was only one, most times there was only one missionary or minister, whatever status he was given. And it was really the lay people who built the church, who really kept the church going.
Okay.
There were a number of lay preachers who served with that missionary or the minister, as the case may be. And they kept the church because the lay person, the minister, could only get to a church perhaps once a month.
Okay, all right, yeah.
To give communion.
I remember talking with someone in Anegada, said, well, when the minister came to Anegada, sometimes they had weddings, they had baptisms, they had everything because the minister didn't come very often. So when he came,
they had to do everything.
Everything was done at that time.
Well, as a matter of fact, here in Easton, they used to keep their weddings during school time.
Okay.
So the weddings would be on a Wednesday, about 2 o'clock. So all the children would vacate the building, and the wedding would then take place.
Okay. But I think
that would happen, like once a month.
Okay, so we see how the church function, still catering to the society. We keep touching on education, but in our next session we would delve a little bit more into the education aspects of it. So we had the worship service on a Sunday, in the Sunday evening. We had the prayer houses. We had prayer meetings. The Methodist system of class meeting, how did that fit in at that time with the classes?
Well, that was a means of really reaching out to more people, because they appointed a leader for a group of the members, maybe 10 persons or so, and that leader would lead those persons during the week or whenever they would have their activities. That was called the class system, because it was these little groups that the church was divided into, and they kept records. They kept, a record of attendance and that kind of thing. But it was really to help enforce their spiritual strength and increase their understanding of the church and their soul salvation and so forth. It was a powerful organization, because a lot of people in those days learned how to lead through that organization. And even when we came to the point of having politicians, those politicians went into that area with a kind of background of leadership, which they were able to get from the work in the Methodist Church in that organization.
So in essence, what we're seeing is that the church, through its function in the society, then became a training ground for persons in positions of leadership community leaders, and even to the point where we see our political leaders coming out of the system within
Yeah,
the church.
that was right. You know,
So,
definitely.
that we could see then is one of the positive impacts of Methodism on the Virgin Islands, because through the church system, the training that was being given, the exposure through the class meeting system to the leadership systems within the church, then provided that training ground for persons to develop their skills.
And I'll give you an example of one slave who I always admire, named Fanny Waters. She was at the Rotown Church, but she became a leader. As a slave, she was a slave, but she was a leader. And she was such a good leader that as the slaves get converted, they wanted to go to her class. Her class became so big that the minister had to divide it in two, and she managed the two. And still they wanted to go to her class, they didn't want to go to any class. So her class grew bigger still, and they had to divide it in three. And she managed all three. Even the equivalent of the governor now, who was, say, at that time, what you call the president at that time, I think, his wife was in her class.
Okay.
She was a very influential woman. So it shows you, you know, that the class system was very, very effective in those days.
Dr. Wheatley, we are out of time. I know we have just scratched the surface talking about Methodism and how the church functioned and the contributions to the Virgin Islands society. And one of the things that jumped out in our discussion was the fact that even in terms of leadership skills, that the church, through its organization, helped to develop the leadership skills within the community. And we saw how the BVI benefited from this level of training within the church, and even to the point of our political leaders coming out of the system within the church. I want to thank you for joining with me this afternoon for this discussion and this conversation on Methodism and how it functioned, how it came into the Virgin Islands. And in our next session, we would look at a little bit more on education and the impact of education and the church in these Virgin Islands. Thank you very much for your contribution this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Thank you.